The morning of my wife's funeral arrived without asking permission. The sky was gray, heavy, as if it carried the same weight pressing down on my chest. I stood beside the coffin, my hands resting on the cold wood, unable to accept that Margaret was inside it. 2 years of love, arguments, laughter, and silent understanding ended in a box that felt far too small for a woman who had been the center of my world. People surrounded me, yet I felt completely alone. They came in pairs and groups, offering condolences in voices trained by habit. "I'm so sorry for your loss. She was a wonderful woman. She's in a better place." I nodded. I thanked them. I heard none of it. My eyes stayed fixed on the flowers, white lilies, Margaret's favorite. She always said they smelled like peace. I wondered if she had found any. My son stood a few steps away with his wife. He wore a black suit I had paid for years ago, his face carefully arranged into something resembling grief. His wife clutched his arm, her eyes dry, her lips tight with impatience rather than sorrow. I noticed things then, small things. How often they checked their phones, how they whispered and stopped when someone passed by, how neither of them came to stand beside me. When the priest spoke about devotion and lifelong love, my son shifted uncomfortably. When Margaret's name was mentioned, my daughter-in-law sighed, as if this ceremony were taking too long. Still, I said nothing. I had buried too many emotions in my life to let one more rise to the surface. As the service came to an end, people began lining up to say their final goodbyes. I remained standing, unmoving, my legs stiff, my heart numb. My son and his wife stepped behind me, assuming wrongly that grief had made me deaf. That was when I heard it. He leaned toward her, his voice low, careless, sharp. Asterisk, asterisk. Now we have to deal with the old man. Asterisk, asterisk. The words slid into my ears like ice water. For a moment I thought I'd imagined it. Grief can twist the mind after all. I stood very still, my breath shallow, my hands tightening against the coffin. Then she replied, asterisk, asterisk, relax. Asterisk, asterisk, she whispered back, almost amused. Asterisk, asterisk, he's old, he won't be a problem for long. Asterisk, asterisk, something inside me broke, but silently. Not the kind of break that makes noise, the kind that changes shape forever. My heart didn't shatter. It hardened. I didn't turn around. I didn't confront them. I didn't let them see that I had heard every cruel syllable spoken over the body of the woman who had given everything for this family. I stared at Margaret's name engraved on the plate. So this is what we were to them now, I thought. An inconvenience. An obstacle, a problem to be dealt with. Suddenly, memories flooded back, things I had ignored, forgiven, or explained away. The missed phone calls, the rushed visits, the way Margaret used to fall quiet whenever our son talked about money, property, or planning for the future. She had known. I swallowed hard, my throat burning. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, my son placed a hand on my shoulder. The gesture was hollow, rehearsed. "Stay strong, Dad," he said. I looked at him then, really looked. And for the first time, I didn't recognize the boy I had raised. I nodded slowly. "I will," I said. But what he didn't understand, what neither of them understood, was that strength does not always look like tears or rage. Sometimes strength is silence, and sometimes silence is the beginning of something they will never see coming. Margaret and I never planned for an easy life. When we married, we owned nothing but a rented room, a second-hand table, and dreams that were far larger than our pockets. Yet she smiled like we already had everything. She always said, asterisk, as long as we stand together, we'll manage, asterisk, and we did. When our son was born, the world suddenly felt fragile and precious at the same time. I worked mornings at the factory and nights driving deliveries. Margaret took in sewing, cleaned offices after hours, and still managed to greet me every night with warm food and tired eyes full of love. We were exhausted but proud. Every sacrifice had a purpose. When winter came, I wore the same coat for 10 years so my son could have a new one. Margaret patched her shoes again and again so he could walk to school without embarrassment. We skipped vacations, postponed dreams, and ignored our own aches because his future mattered more than our comfort. And we never complained. Our house, the one my son now lived in, was built brick by brick with overtime pay and borrowed money. Margaret chose the paint colors. I fixed the roof myself. That house carried our laughter, our arguments, our quiet evenings, and our prayers. We believed it would always be home. As our son grew older, something began to shift. At first, it was subtle. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became rare. Questions about our health turned into questions about the house, the land, the savings. Margaret noticed it long before I did. He asks about money more than us, she said one night, folding laundry with trembling hands. He's just worried, I replied, unwilling to see what stood right in front of me. She didn't argue. She never did. She simply nodded and went quiet, the way she did when a truth felt too heavy to fight over. When my health started failing, Margaret took care of everything without complaint. She made appointments, tracked medications, and held my hand in hospital corridors. But I noticed how often she stared at the ceiling at night, lost in thoughts she never shared. One evening she finally spoke. "Promise me something," she said softly. "Anything. When I'm gone, don't give them everything just because they're family." I laughed nervously. "You're not going anywhere." She turned to me, her eyes clear and serious. "Just promise." I did. 3 months later she was gone. Cancer doesn't announce itself politely. It arrives, takes what it wants, and leaves devastation behind. Margaret fought quietly, bravely, without ever asking why asterisk. Even in pain, she worried more about me than herself. Our son visited once. He stood at the foot of her bed, checking his watch while she struggled to breathe. He said he'd come back. He never did. On her final night, she held my hand and whispered, "They think love is inheritance. Show them what it really means." I didn't understand then. I do now, as I stood alone in the house after her funeral. Every corner whispered her presence. The kitchen still smelled faintly of her cooking. Her cardigan hung behind the door. The silence was unbearable, but beneath it something else began to form. Clarity. Everything we had built was never meant to reward greed. It was meant to honor love, loyalty, and sacrifice. And for the first time in my life, I realized that protecting Margaret's legacy didn't mean holding on. It meant letting go of those who never deserved it. The old man they thought they had to deal with was gone. What remained was someone they had never truly known. The house felt different after the funeral, not empty alert as if the walls themselves were waiting. I spent the next 2 days doing very little that anyone could see, and a great deal that no one could imagine. I moved slowly, deliberately, the way an old man is expected to move. That expectation worked in my favor. People often confuse age with weakness. On the 3rd morning I called my son. He answered on the 4th ring, irritation slipping through before he masked it. "Yes, it's your father," I said calmly. There was a pause. "I know. I'd like you and your wife to come over for dinner tonight," I continued. "One last family meal. Your mother would have wanted that." He didn't hesitate, of course. He said, suddenly warm, "That's a good idea, Dad. Too good. Too fast." When I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at Margaret's chair. I imagined her there, hands folded, watching quietly. She had always believed people revealed themselves most clearly when they thought they had already won. That evening I set the table the way she liked it, the good plates, the real silverware, the tablecloth we only used on holidays. It felt almost ceremonial, less like a dinner, more like a closing chapter. At exactly 7 o'clock, they arrived. My daughter-in-law scanned the house the moment she stepped inside, her eyes moving from the furniture to the walls, the shelves, the corners. My son kissed my cheek quickly, already halfway distracted. "Smells nice," he said. "It's your mother's recipe," I replied. They exchanged a look. Dinner was quiet at first. They spoke about trivial things, traffic, work, plans for the future. They didn't mention Margaret, not once. I noticed how my daughter-in-law kept glancing toward a leather folder resting beside my chair. Curiosity always reveals greed. Halfway through the meal, my son finally cleared his throat. "So, Dad," he began casually, "have you thought about arrangements?" I took a sip of water. "I have," I said. Both of them straightened slightly. "I realized something after your mother died." I continued, my voice steady. "Life is short, too short to leave things unsaid." My daughter-in-law smiled thinly. "That's very wise of you." I nodded. "Which is why I invited you here." I reached for the folder. Before I opened it, I looked directly at my son. "I heard what you said at the funeral." The room froze. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "I heard you whisper to your wife," I said quietly, "about dealing with the old man." My daughter-in-law stood abruptly. "You misunderstood?" "No," I interrupted gently. "I understood perfectly." My son's face reddened. "You were listening to private conversation. You spoke behind my back at my wife's grave." I replied, "You made it public the moment you opened your mouth." I opened the folder. Inside were documents neatly arranged. Not just papers, but conclusions. "I want you both to listen carefully," I said, "because this is the last lesson your mother and I will ever give you." They leaned forward. And for the first time that evening, I saw fear flicker where confidence had been. The dinner was over. What remained was truth. I slid the folder across the table, stopping it just short of my son's trembling hands. "Go on," I said calmly. "Open it." He hesitated, then flipped it open, confidence draining from his face with every page he turned. His wife leaned over his shoulder, her breath growing quick, uneven. "What is this?" she snapped. "Final decisions," I replied. "Made together, your mother and I." The first document was the deed to the house. My son frowned. "This is transferred." "Yes," I said. "Out of my name." His eyes widened to me. I shook my head slowly. "To a foundation that provides housing for families who actually care for one another." The color left his face. My daughter-in-law grabbed the papers. "This can't be real." "Oh, it's very real," I said gently. "Signed, filed, final." The next pages followed. Savings accounts closed, investments donated, life insurance redirected. Each page stripped away another assumption they had built their future on. "You had no right," my son shouted, standing so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. I looked up at him, not angry, not afraid. "I had every right," I said. "It was my life, our sacrifices, our love." He slammed his fist on the table. "We're your family." I met his eyes. Family doesn't whisper about dealing with a grieving father. That was when the screaming started. My daughter-in-law cried that I was cruel, that I was punishing them, that I was confused and manipulated. I listened quietly. Then I reached for the final envelope. "This," I said, holding it up, "is your mother's letter." The room went silent. I opened it and read aloud, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Asterisk, if you are hearing this, then the truth has already revealed itself. Asterisk, asterisk, please don't be angry. I don't want revenge, I want dignity. Asterisk, asterisk, what we built was never meant to reward greed. Asterisk, asterisk, let it serve those who still know how to love. Asterisk, my son collapsed back into his chair. "You planned this?" he whispered. "Yes," I said softly. "She did." The lawyer, who had been sitting quietly near the door, stood and cleared his throat. "All arrangements are legally binding," he said. "There is nothing to contest. That was when my daughter-in-law lost control." "You ruined us," she screamed. I stood. "No," I said. "I freed myself. I walked to the door and opened it. I will always be your father," I told my son without turning back, "but I will no longer be your safety net." As I stepped outside, the night air felt lighter than anything I'd breathed in years. Behind me they shouted, they cried, they begged, But I didn't stop, because revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is walking away with peace, knowing that love was honored, sacrifice was protected, and the legacy of a good woman was finally safe.